What is the primary motive of Mr. Putin for his invasion? See, the first thing is this illegal regime change, this completely undemocratic regime change that was effected by the West in 2014, when the elected president, the elected government was ousted, right? Viktor Yanukovych's government, and Petro Poroshenko was installed in his place. That is completely illegal and undemocratic. The West talks about a rules based or global order and democracy and liberalism. Where did all that go when they did this regime change? So, and then after this regime change happened, the new regime in Ukraine, which is a pro West, pro US regime, was making moves to become a part of NATO. NATO is what is NATO? NATO during the Cold War was the American anti Russian alliance. So, NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The US is part of it. I believe, I'm not sure if Canada is part of it. Look it up, look it up. Okay. I'm not going to give you, I don't remember everything, but France is part of it, Germany is part of it, the UK is part of it, and various other countries in Western Europe are part of NATO. It was an anti USSR alliance. After the dissolution of the USSR, NATO for some time did not have any real meaning. It is essentially the way of the US to control Europe, right? Because you have US troops permanently stationed in Germany, which essentially tells you that Germany is under US occupation. It's under American occupation. There's no other nice way of putting it. Imagine if you had American troops permanently stationed in India. What would that mean? It means India is under US occupation, nothing else. So Germany is currently under US occupation, and so on and so forth, right? So, and there was this deal that was agreed upon after 1991, I believe, that NATO will not expand further east. That countries, nations that used to be under the part of the Soviet bloc would not be incorporated into NATO. That was the agreement that was made between Russia and NATO. And now they are trying to break the agreement because they were trying to bring Ukraine into NATO. They changed the regime illegally, undemocratically, and then the new regime was making moves to join NATO. That is a red line Mr. Putin will never allow anyone to cross. That is simply unacceptable because that is the encirclement of Russia. If you look at the map, I don't have a map of all the US military bases, but it essentially encircles Russia. Imagine if you had Russian military bases in Canada, in Mexico, in Cuba, all across the US. Would the US not see this as a declaration of war and a grave threat to their national security? Obviously, they would see it that way. But if the Russians see it as a threat to national security, they should tolerate it. That's the kind of attitude the US has. So obviously, Mr. Putin is not going to accept that. And when the Ukrainians started making moves for joining NATO, that was the red line that Mr. Putin could not allow them to cross, because then everything is up for grabs. So that is the primary reason. That's the primary reason why Mr. Putin has decided to invade Ukraine. So that's what it is. And also because of, the media will not highlight this, but the Russians have been claiming that the Ukrainians are perpetrating all kinds of atrocities against Russian speaking people. There have been massacres and murders and disappearances and whatnot. Okay, the Western media will not corroborate this, so we don't know what to believe, what not to believe. We in India believe the English speaking media, especially if they speak with a posh British accent or an American accent, and they will never report all these things. But I believe it may be true. Why should we only believe one side of the story? The Russians have been making the claim, and actually, it was briefly reported. Some of these things were briefly reported before they were all swept under the carpet. They were even reported by the Western media. So these are the reasons why uh, Mr. Putin has gone ahead with the invasion.